Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley, and in this video, I want to share my 2025 TBR. I love watching TBR videos. I think it's really cool to see what other people want to read and what other people are reading, and so I'm just excited to kind of talk about the books that are on my radar this year. I'm gonna kind of talk about my books in like categories by genre. So I'll talk about fantasy and then nonfiction and then fiction and then like mystery, classics, stuff like that. And so, with all of that being said, let's get into the video. I hope you guys enjoy. Okay, I feel like these videos just give everyone a beautiful glimpse into how tired I always am. But okay, let's get into it. So, first, I want to talk about my fantasy reading list. Um, I'm actually like pretty excited about my fantasy reading list because I don't typically read a lot of fantasy. It's like crazy, but I would say maybe 2022, 2023 was the year that I really got like back into reading, and I just never really gravitated towards fantasy. But the thing is that like when I was a kid, I was obsessed with reading. All I would ever do was read. And when I look back at the books that I read when I was in like middle school, high school, it was all like fantasy and science fiction, which is like so bizarre to me because that is, I would say, a genre that's like out of my comfort zone now. But obviously just being on booktube and book talk, like I see how many popular fantasy books there are out there, and I'm not gonna lie, it makes me feel kind of left out. And so I really do just want to read um or try to read a lot of fantasy this year, because I kind of want to see what the hype is about. I want to see if it's something that I can get into, and I feel like this year I feel like I finally like got that interest back in reading fantasy, so I'm excited. So let's get into my fantasy reads that I want to get to. So the first that I have is ACOTAR. I feel like ACOTAR like stands on its own, doesn't even really need an explanation. I honestly don't even really know what the series is about. I just know that it's super popular and it's by Sarah J. Maas. Like that's literally all I know. But a friend actually gifted me the first book, I think like last year, and so I kind of want to read it just to see what it could be about. And see if the series is something that I can get into. And then I also have Throne of Glass. Throne of Glass would actually be a reread if I were to read them again this year. I read Throne of Glass like around the time that it was first coming out. I don't know exactly when it came out. I just remember I started reading them in middle school, um, which for me now would probably be like 10 years ago. And I think I finished reading the last book in like high school. And so I kind of read them over a couple of years. And I will say, like, I loved the first few Throne of Glass novels. But by the time I got to the end, I hated them. Like, I hated the last book. I thought it was so long. But I also think at that point, I had been reading the series for so many years that I just wanted to be done. So I felt a little bit fatigued. So now that I feel like Throne of Glass is having this like renaissance, since like so many people are getting into it and so many people love it, um I kind of want to reread them just to see like if I read them closer together with new eyes, like if I would actually like them better. It's not that I hated them. Like the first, I would say 4 books I loved, but I think books 5 and 6, I was like, okay, this is like okay, not bad. But then book 7, I was just like completely over it. And so I kind of want to reread the series actually just to see if I will have a better opinion about the last book. So that's Son of Glass. And then I want to read the Carval and the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. Um, I heard Carval comes before Once Broken Heart, and the reason I want to read Carval is because I want to read the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. Like I've heard Haley Pham rave about the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, and I feel like the books in that series are so beautiful, but I feel like I've heard people say that Carval is like the precursor to that series, so I want to read both. And then I want to read Phantasma by Kaylee Smith. Again, that's just another book that I just want to read literally based off of its cover. I think the cover is so cool and so beautiful. And I heard that it's similar to Carval. Like I think both books are kind of just about like this game, I guess, this like fantasy like game, I guess, that the characters end up finding themselves in. And so um I don't know. I'm interested, and so I'm curious to see what it could be about. And then I want to read Sky Shade by Alex Astor. I've already read Lightlark and Nightbane by her. I will say, like, I wouldn't, and those are actually probably the only like fantasy books that I've really read in the past like 3 years, apart from like the Divine Rival series. But anyways, yeah, I want to read Sky Shade. I just want to continue with the series. I don't know if Sky Shade is the last book or not, but I don't know. I feel very neutral about Lightlark and Nightbane. Like, I find the stories not super well written, but still very entertaining. And so I'm every time I read the books, I feel like it's just vibes for me. Like, I'm not thinking about it too seriously, and so I kind of just want to keep reading. um and then I want to read the Kingdom of the Wicked series, and then the Throne of the Fallen series by Carrie Maniscalco. This is just another, like, similar to Caraval and Once Upon a Broken Heart. I want to read Kingdom of the Wicked because I want to read the Throne of the Fallen series. And again, I heard Kingdom of the Wicked is kind of like the precursor to the Throne of the Fallen. And I want to read Throne of the Fallen because I truly just think the covers are so beautiful. Like, I just want to have them to read them. And so, because I want to read Throne of the Fallen, I also want to read Kingdom of the Wicked. I'm the kind of person where it's like, I hate when people say this is like interconnected, like standalone or like interconnected series, but you don't have to read the first one to understand the second. I'm like, no. If you're telling me that like even a little bit of the story could be intertwined with like another book or another series, I'm gonna read the first series because I really want to have all the backstory so I can have the best reading experience. It's like, I feel like if there's backstory, I want to have it, and I'm not just gonna be like, oh, I'll just read them out of order. No, I'm gonna if Kingdom of the Wicked comes before Throne of the Fallen, I'm gonna read the Kingdom of the Wicked series first. So that's kind of what's on my fantasy reading list. It is a little bit ambitious. I'm not gonna lie, like, my reading goal for this year is 100 books, and I feel like based off of fantasy alone, that's probably already a quarter. So we'll see. Maybe a quarter of my reads this year will be fantasy. I'd be very, very surprised and interested if it is. But yeah, that's my fantasy reading list. Okay, and now I want to talk about my romance reading list. I feel like romance is probably the genre that I read the most alongside like contemporary fiction or literary fiction. Every summer I do this thing that I just call, like, it's literally just me that does it, but I just call it like the summer of romance, where I only read romance books in the summer. Because I just think summer screams romance to me, and I don't know. I just always get so excited to read romance in the summer. And so I feel like every year when I look back at all the books, it is a lot of romance because I only read them for like 3 months straight, and then I do read a couple of romances throughout the rest of the year too. Um, but all of that being said, I'm really excited about all the romances being released this year and all previous romances that I've never gotten to get to that I do want to get to this year. And so, just to get into the list, my first romance book that I want to read is Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. She's like an auto-buy author for me at this point. I find all of her books so entertaining. I love all of her books. I've read all of them except for Bride, because, and maybe I will read Bride this year. Again, I just avoided Bride because it just seemed more fantasy, like fantasy romance, and that was just never really my thing, but maybe I will get to it this year. But yeah, Deep End is her new release this year, and I'm so excited. I think all of her books are just so funny, so entertaining. I love that they kind of always have, like, they always follow the same blueprint. So I feel like even if like the background of the story is a little bit different, like, you always know that it's probably going to be in a STEM setting. The guy is probably always going to be gigantic and kind of cranky, and then the girl is probably always going to be a little bit more bubbly. And so I don't know. I'm just excited. I just feel like her books are almost comforting in the sense that it's like, yeah, maybe the situations may be a little bit different, but you kind of already know what to expect as far as characters go. And then I want to read Beg, Borrow, or Steal by Sarah Adams. Again, with Sarah Adams, for me, is just one of those authors that I just feel very neutral about. Um Begbara Steele is part of her When in Rome series. Um and it's kind of about this like group of four siblings. And that this like these four siblings that kind of live in this small town, and so each sibling is getting their own books. So this is the third book in that series. And it follows one of the sisters, so I'm excited to read it. I feel like the previous two books in the series, When in Rome and Practice Makes Perfect, I did enjoy When in Rome. I think I gave it 3.5, and then I gave Practice Makes Perfect 3 stars. um I enjoyed them. I think they're cozy. Like, I don't think they're necessarily the best romances ever, but I think they're very cute and very fun. And I feel like if you her books are really good for just like escapism. I didn't really like her cheat sheet or rulebook series, so if she's releasing any more books in that world, I will probably not be reading them. But the One in Rome one, yes. And then this next one I'm super excited about. It's The Love Lyric by Christina Forrest. I discovered Christina Forrest last year, and now I'm obsessed with her. I think her writing is literally perfect. I think the way she paces her books is amazing. And similarly to the When in Rome series, this new book, The Love Lyric, it's part of like a little series that it's like these three sisters, so each sister is getting her own book. So this is the third and final sister, Iris, and I'm so sad that like my time with these sisters is coming to an end because I truly love the series so much. But I'm so excited to read her book. This is probably one of my more like anticipated reads this year. Like, I will be the first one buying that book when it comes out, I swear. And then I want to read the Done and Dusted series by Lila Sage. This is like a cowboy romance series, which I am very curious to get into because I tried reading the Chestnut Spring series last year, and I think I made it. That series is like 5 books. I think I made it 3 books in before I was like, I need to stop because Powerless I hated so much that I needed a mental break. And so I've heard a lot of people talk about Done and Dusted. I'm not gonna lie, I don't have super high expectations for it, just because I feel like um, Chestnut Springs kind of put me off cowboy romance a little bit, but I think the covers are beautiful. So again, it's like I want to read them because I think the covers are just so cute. But in that series, there's Done and Dusted, Swift and Saddled, Lost and Lassoed, and Wild and Wrangled. I don't know if there's another book coming out in that series, but those are the four that I have so far. Um, and those are the four that I really want to read. And so I'm curious to see how it is, but I'm also happy that if I do read them, I'll have some pretty books on my shelves. And then I have Love and Other Disasters and A Perfect Vintage. I'm talking about these two at the same time because, to be honest, I don't really know what these books are about. I've just heard people talk about them, and so I thought they might just be fun things to get to. A Perfect Vintage, I've heard Haley Pham talk about, and she said that she liked it, so we'll see. Those are kind of just some random books in there that I'm like, maybe I will get to them, but they're on my list. And then I have Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez, which is going to be a new release this year. Um, in my previous video where I wrapped up the books I read in 2024, I kind of talked about how I feel like I have very mixed feelings about Abby Jimenez's books because I think they're well written and I enjoy reading them, but I don't feel crazy or like obsessed about them like other people do. And I feel like there's something about her books that I just don't really connect with. So while it's like they're fine for me to read, it's hard for me to get like super invested in her stories, especially because there's just so much going on that it kind of takes me out of it. So I want to read Say You'll Remember Me just to see if I will feel differently. I'm not gonna lie, I've read 6 of her books and I kind of feel the same, so I don't necessarily think I'll feel differently about this one, but I am curious to read it since I know it's like highly anticipated for a lot of people. And then I want to read Attached at the Hip by Christine Riccio. To be honest, I don't really know I see it on my list. I don't really know what it's about, but I guess it's on there, so I guess I want to read it. And then I have Curvy Girl Summer by Danielle Allen. Um, That book I've heard a lot of people talk about. I think it just looks so cute. Like it looks like a black like romance, and I'm like, I love reading romances about black love, and so I'm excited to read Curvy Girl Summer in the Summer. And then I want to read all of Annabelle Monaghan's books. Nora Goes Off Script, Same Time Next Summer, Summer Romance, and then her new one, It's a Love Story, that I think is coming out this year. I actually really wanted to read her books last summer, but I just didn't get to them. So like they're like number one priority. Like I want to read her books. I've heard that they're super short, but they're also super good and well written, and also like just very mature, like romances where it actually feels romantic and not super lusty or spicy, which I always appreciate. So I'm very excited to read them actually. And then I have The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. This came out in 2024, and it kind of was like a little bit off my radar. Like I dropped the microphone. I did it a couple times in the last video. That's a trend for me, I guess. But yeah, The Pairing, I don't know, like I knew about it, but then at first I wasn't super interested, but then when I kind of read a little bit more about the book and people's reviews, like people were saying it's very atmospheric, um which I always love, so that kind of like made me want to pick it up and read it. And I loved and still love Red, White, and Royal Blue. So I kind of have been wanting to get to another one of Casey McQuiston's books. So yeah, I'm excited to read that. And then there's Between Friends and Lovers by Charlene Obuobi. Um, I have heard a couple people talk about this book too, and the cover looks beautiful. And so, although I'm not super familiar as to what it's about, I have heard a lot of people say good things about it last year. So I want to read it this summer. And then I have probably one of the most anticipated reads of the year, not just for me, but for everyone, Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. I feel like I don't even need to explain why I want to read this book. I mean, I know not everyone loves Emily Henry, but I love Emily Henry, so I'm just so excited to get to this. I feel like I love all of her books. They're all a hit for me. And so I feel like this one is going to be no exception. And then I have Audra and Bash Are Just Friends by Tia Williams. I love Tia Williams, and Audra, I feel like I'm not gonna be able to pronounce this girl's name. I don't know why. Audra, 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 and is actually the daughter of the main character in Tia Williams' probably most popular book, 7 Days in June. And so I think it's really cool that she's getting her own book and it's going to be a young adult. And I don't typically read young adult, but it's Tia Williams, so I'm going to read it. She's one of my favorite authors, autobi author. I love it. And I love her. And then I want to read Happiness for Beginners by Catherine Center. I just want to read it because I read The Bodyguard by her and I didn't love it, but then I heard Haley Pham talk about this book and she said it was really good. And I feel like this book might be a little bit of a different vibe or a different tone than The Bodyguard was. So I kind of do want to check it out and try it. Then I have What You Wish For by Catherine Center. Okay, I guess another Catherine Center book, so we'll see if these kind of change my mind about her. And then I have X's and O's and The Catch by Amy Leah. I read Set on You by this author a couple of months ago, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was super cute and just a really fun, lighthearted romance. And so I want to read the rest of the books that she's written. Set on You, X's and O's, and The Catch are kind of like this series. It's like, I think X's and O's is the sister of the main character in Set on You, and then The Catch is about the best friend of the main character in Set on You. So I'm excited to read their stories. And then I have Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. I've read so many Christina Lauren's books, but not this one. And I feel like this is probably one of her most popular and just like most like famous book talk books, or her, there it's two people, but I feel like this is one of their most like famous books, and I'm just like, I can't believe I haven't read it, and I wanted to read it last year and I didn't. So I'm like, I really not want to, I am going to get to Love in Other Words this year, mark my words. And then there's What Happens in Amsterdam by Rachel and Solomon. I put this book on there because I read The X Talk by this author and I really liked it, but none of her other books have really grabbed my attention. But the cover for this one looked cute, so maybe I will get to it. I just have it on my list. Maybe I will get to it. And then the last book that I have is 40 Little Secret by Jessica Lepe. Truthfully, I think I just saw this book in a Barnes and Noble, and I thought the cover was cute. I didn't even buy it. I just took a picture of the cover and I thought it was cute. So I just put it on the list. So maybe I will read it, who knows. But that's my romance reading list. I feel like there are a lot of really cool romances coming out this year, so I'm really, really excited to read them and just to see what they're about. Um yeah, I love romance. They're just such good escape, but I also feel like I learn a lot just about love, obviously, but just like different perspectives that people have. They're always just so fun to read, but there's of course like I don't like seeing romance as just this like fluffy thing because I feel like there is a lot you can learn and take away from romance novels. So I'm just really, really excited to get to all of these romances this year. So, the next category that I kind of want to talk about is my fiction reading list, and I have quite a few books on here. I love reading fiction and like contemporary fiction, literary fiction, historical fiction is probably my favorite, and so, yeah, there are just a lot of really cool books coming out this year and books that have already been out that I want to get to. So let's get into it. The first one on my list is Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi. I read Homegoing by this author last year and I loved it. I thought that book was amazing, and so I kind of knew that I wanted to read more of her books. And so Transcendent Kingdom is another book by her that I really, really want to read. I don't like know the details of the premise of the book, but I do know that it talks about themes like religion and um like destiny and like purpose, and I love books that talk about those things, so I'm really, really excited to read that one. Then I want to read Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. I guess it should have been in the fantasy section, but I don't know why I put it here, and I should probably include The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and The Hunger Games as well. I've read The Hunger Games before, but I read them in like middle school, and so it's been a really long time, and I want to read this book, but I kind of want to reread The Hunger Games just to kind of have that backstory fresh. And I want to read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes too. I saw the movie without even reading the book, which is something I never do, but I just went to go with a friend on her birthday. Or for her birthday to go see the movie. So I really want to read the book. So that's kind of that. And then I want to read Cleopatra and Frankenstein and Blue Sisters by Coco Mellors. Um, Cleopatra and Frankenstein has been on my radar for a while, and then I think Blue Sisters came out last year. And so they're just books that I've kind of been interested in reading. I think they're just like literary fiction novels, but I heard they're pretty popular and they're pretty good, so I want to read them. And then I have Firefly Lane, The Women, and the Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I feel like so many others discovered Kristen Hanna last year, and truly I think her books are amazing. And so I just want to read so many of them, and I love historical fiction. I feel like she writes it so well that I'm just like obsessed. Like I cannot wait to get to more of her books this year. Um and then I want to read, oh, also The Great Alone by her. I actually already read it, and so I'm just putting it in here, but I already read it and it was freaking amazing. What did we expect? Um and then I want to read Looking for Alaska by John Green. I read a lot of John Green when I was a kid, and so I feel like he's just a very comforting and nostalgic author for me, but I also feel like he is that for a lot of other people as well. So I definitely want to read Looking for Alaska. I feel like that's one of his classic books that I've just never really gotten to yet. And then I want to read Shark Heart by Emily Habeck. I've heard about this book for a few years now too, and I think it's about like this man who slowly starts to turn to a shark, and it just sounds so cool and emotional, and I'm just very, very interested to see like what happens in this book. It just sounds really interesting, so I want to read it. And then I want to read a couple of Hildebrand novels. Hotel Nantucket, The Five-Star Weekend are what I have on there, but I also know 28 Summers and The Perfect Couple I've heard are really good, so I want to get to a couple of her books. I heard they're really, really good, and I've never read them, but I've always been curious, so I'm excited to get to some Ellen Hildebrand this year. I also want to read, I also have Swan Song by her. I also want to read Half of a Yellow Sun, Purple Hibiscus, and then Dream Count by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Dream Count is actually coming out this year, and I didn't even know that until like yesterday. So I'm so excited, but Purple Hibiscus and Half of Yellow Sun have been out for a while. And I just love Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I read Americana by her when I was in high school, and I was floored. And then ever since then, like I've always just loved her. I think she's so wise, she's so smart, and the way she's like a feminist author. She writes a lot of fiction, but then she writes nonfiction as well. But I just think her insight and her like opinions and her views are just so wise and well thought out and intersectional, and I think she's great. So I just want to read more of her books, and I'm super super excited that she's coming out with a new one. I freaking love it. I think her commentary is always amazing, especially since she's a Nigerian author, but she writes, at least in Americana. I haven't read her other two books, but in Americana, it's kind of about a Nigerian woman who moves to the United States and how she kind of has to deal with issues of race for the first time. And then I kind of, by reading the description of Dream Count, it kind of seems like it'll follow like a similar path. So I'm really, really excited. And then I want to read A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I am just very curious. I'm kind of scared of this book, and I feel like a lot of people are. I've just heard it's very emotional, very traumatic. I definitely don't feel like I'm definitely not in the space to read that book now. I feel like that is a book I'd have to read with like perfect mental, spiritual clarity, like, and I'm not there right now, but I'm like I need to make sure that I am a-okay before reading that book, because I heard it's very very triggering, um and just very like devastating. And so I really want to read it out of curiosity. I'm just very curious to hear this book that I've heard people talk about for years. And then I want to read IQ 84 by Haruki Murakami. I put that book as a placeholder because I want to read any book by Murakami this year. I've known about him as an author for a while, and I've just never read any of his books. So I just want to read one of his books. Then I want to read 11/22/63 by Stephen King. I've always wanted to read a Stephen King book. I kind of also want to get to Billy Summers this year as well, but I'm not the biggest horror person. And I do want to maybe dabble into the horror genre a little bit, but I really am not a person who I think would enjoy that. And so I heard Billy Summers and 11/22/63 aren't horror novels. And I've heard Haley Pham rave about both books actually. And I mean, she's one of my favorite booktubers, and I feel like we have similar tastes, so I trust her recommendations. So I'm really excited to get to kind of these Stephen King books because I want to read one of his books, just not a horror one. So I'm excited to check those out. And then I want to read Memory Peace by Lisa Ko. I actually discovered this book on like the online catalog of the library, and it sounded really interesting. It kind of I okay. Let me pause. Something about me is I love books that take place in the past, so like historical fiction, but also just like books that kind of follow a group of family or friends like across a couple of years. Like I just love like almost like a saga kind of. I love books that kind of display that. And so I heard Memory Peace. I think it's about like two or three friends, and it kind of follows them over the years. And I think it starts in like the 80s or 90s. So I'm really excited. I think that'll be super, super fun to read. And then How to Walk Away by Catherine Center. Um, and again, just another Catherine Center book that I want to get to. And then I have a couple of random ones like Greta and Vowden by Rebecca Riley and Housemates by Emma Copley Eisenberg. I just saw those two covers on Goodreads and I thought they looked cool. And I was like, well, I want to check out, more literary contemporary fiction, so why not? Then I want to read Pineapple Street by, who was that? Oh, Jenny Jackson. I've wanted to read this book for years too. I just think the cover is so cool, and I think the story follows like rich people, and I love rich people drama. So I want to read Pineapple Street. Like this is one of those books that I'm like I have to get to because I feel like I put it off for years. And if you don't see me, I'm like hitting my leg to emphasize the point. Like I really want to read it. So um I will get to that this year. And then I want to read The Invention of Wings by Sue Monk Kidd. Um The Secret Life of Bees by this author is probably one of my favorite books ever. I read it in ninth grade. and I absolutely fell in love with that book, and I reread it, and I want to reread The Secret Life of Bees again, actually, but because of that, I'm like, I want to check out another Sumont Kid book. So I have The Invention of Wings on there. Then I want to read The Happy and You Know It by Laura Hankin. I read One Star Romance by Laura Hankin this year, and I enjoyed it, so I was like, why not check out another one of her books to see if I like it. Then I want to read I see this next book, Babel by R.F. Kuang. I'm so intimidated by this book. I know a lot of people are. Um, but I do want to read it. I read Yellowface by her, and I really did enjoy Yellowface. I thought that book was so good, and so I already know that she's a good author, and I've heard people rave about Babel, and so I definitely want to read it. And I think what intrigues me about Babel is that, I mean, I feel like this is obvious, but it's like, you know, the Tower of Babel is talked about in the Bible, and um, the Tower of Babel falling, I think. Don't quote me. I need to like brush up on my biblical history, but I think it's like how languages developed. And so, and I think it's like recognized, that Babel is languages, and that in this book, that like the Babel whatever institute, I think that takes place in this book, is about like translation. So I think for me, as a Christian as well, it'd be cool to see like if there are any parallels to Christianity and like what those are. Um, and so I'm just very interested in reading this book. Then I want to read Colored Television by Danzy Senna. Oh, I think this is like a historical fiction. I saw the cover on Goodreads. I was just searching like what are some cool contemporary fiction books to read, and I think that one came up. And then I want to read Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Oh my gosh. If there is an anticipated book this year, it is that one. I mean, I think Taylor Jenkins Reid, I read all of her books. She's probably one of my favorite authors ever. And so when I heard that she was releasing this book, I almost screamed. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're getting another Taylor Jenkins Reid book. I can't believe it's going to be another historical fiction. She's brilliant and incredible and amazing. And I'm so excited. I think this book takes place in the 80s, about a woman who's trying to become the first woman to be on a like a spaceship or on this space mission, which I think is really really cool. I mean, she could write a book about anything and I'll read it. So this is probably one of my most anticipated books. And then I want to read Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I mean, I enjoy Sally Rooney. I feel like I'm kind of like up and down with her, because Normal People was 5 stars for me, Conversations with Friends was 2 stars, and then Beautiful World, Where Are You was like 3.5. So I feel like I've kind of been all over the map with her. But I do enjoy her writing overall, and I just like her as an author, so I want to read Intermezzo, and the book sounds interesting. And okay, this next book I will read this year, The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. I was supposed to read this last year. Did it come out in 2022 or 2023? I don't know, but I feel like I've known about this book for a long time, and I wanted to read it, and I will. This is another book that I'm like, I have to read. I want to read it so, so bad. It's another historical fiction. It sounds so interesting, and I just think the discussion, like, or the topics that about like race and disability and community, that I think those are some themes that the book addresses. I mean, that's stuff that's like right up my alley, and so I will read The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store this year. And then I want to read Good Material by Dolly Alderton. I read Everything I Know About Love by her a few years ago, and I loved it. And so I just always wanted to read another one of her books. I kind of want to get to some of her other books as well, but Good Material, I think, is one of her like recent releases. Um, is it a romance? Maybe it should have been in the romance category. I don't know. But either way, I just put it there. You know the vibe. Like like I just want to read it, so who cares? And then I want to read Big Swiss by Jen Began. I'm actually reading it right now. I have just always been very curious about that book. Like, I've just seen it. The cover looks insane. Honestly, I didn't read it for a while because the cover kind of scared me, but I bought it on Kindle. And so I still don't like the cover, but I'm like, at least I don't have to look at it on my shelf because it's on my Kindle. But it's just one of those books that I felt like is just kind of weird. And now that I'm reading it now, I'm like, it definitely is weird, but I'm curious to see how it finishes, like how the story like ends up wrapping itself up. It's about this like woman who transcribes therapy sessions for a sex therapist, and then she ends up falling in love with one of his clients. And I'm like, that sounds so weird and kooky, and I love it. I want to read it. And then I want to read Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily R. Austin. I think this is about a lesbian, like atheist, who ends up getting a job at like a Catholic church. Sounds very interesting to me. I'm excited to see how, um, yeah, like what story the author tries to tell, and how it goes. I don't know. It sounds really interesting. And then I want to read Between Us and Mad About You by Mari McFarlane. Um, I heard about Mari McFarlane through Haley Pham. I mean, Haley Pham has inspired like almost half of this reading list at this point, but she's raved about them. And I read Just Last Night by her last year, and I enjoyed it. But I think I thought it would be more of like a rom com where Mari McFarlane's writing reminds me a lot of Sally Rooney, which is fine. I like Sally Rooney, but I don't think that's what I expected going into it. But I feel like now that I know how Mari McFarlane is as a writer, I can kind of go in with better expectations and maybe enjoy the books even more. I feel like her when I read the backs of the books, they're marketed as like these rom-com types, and I'm like, her books don't, at least the book that I read, maybe these two were different, but I'm like, at least the one that I read just last night does not read like a rom-com at all. It is definitely more literary fiction than a rom-com, but still good. But I just think it's funny how it's marketed, and I feel like it's a completely different reading experience. And then I want to read The Death of Vivek Oji. I've heard about this book for a long time. Another book that I'll throw in there is Detransition Baby. I've heard about those two books for a long time, and I've wanted to read them. I just never have. So those two books I just definitely want to get to. I think The Death of Vivek Oji is about a trans man in Africa, which and it's about like his family, and it's like a family saga, and again, I love that stuff. And then I think Detransition Baby is about, I don't remember, exactly. I think it's a person who transitions but then detransitions, but then ends up having like an affair and like a baby, and so then it's like three of them have to be in a relationship together. I don't know. It's it sounds messy, but I'm interested. I want to read it. And then the last book that I have is Good Dirt by Charmaine Wilkerson. I found out a couple days ago that she's releasing a new book. She's the author of Black Cake, and I love Black Cake, and I love her books as well because I'm someone, like, my entire family is from Jamaica, and I just feel like I want to read more books about Caribbean families, but I also feel like I don't see a lot of books like about Caribbean families, like just talked about in general. And so I loved Black Cake. I felt like so seen in that book, just as far as like seeing like my family, just like my family's culture like represented. And so I'm excited to read Good Dirt. I don't fully know what it's about, but I'm like, it doesn't matter. I loved her previous book so much that I want to read her new one. And so those are the fiction books that I want to read this year. Quite a lot. I never talk this much, and I feel like my mouth is getting so dry and tired. But I'm so excited. There are just so many good books that I want to read, that I want to get to, and I already know I'm not going to get to all of them, but that was my fiction reading list. I'm so excited to get to these. Let's move on to my mystery thriller reading list. That reading list is pretty short. I don't read a lot of mystery thriller. Just because I'm very picky and I just feel like they're kind of boring to me. But I do have a couple that I've heard about that I want to read. I want to read None of This Is True and Then She Was Gone by Lisa Joel. Um, I don't know. I don't even really know what they're about, but I feel like I've heard a lot of people talk about them, so I want to read them. And then I want to read The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. I mean, I've had this book on my radar for years, and I don't know why I've never read it. And I feel like out of all the books that he's written that I've kind of seen, I feel like this is probably one that I would like the most. And then I want to read The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. I read The Silent Patient by him and loved it. I read The Fury by him, hated it. So I kind of want to read The Maiden just to see like what I will think, like where my opinion will fall. And then the last mystery thriller book that I want to read is Not Quite Dead Yet by Holly Jackson. I love Holly Jackson. She's probably an like thriller mystery author. I feel like she's one of the only authors who can like actually have me on my toes and like super engaged in the story the whole time. So I want to read Not Quite Dead Yet, her new release. And so those are the mystery thriller books, pretty short. Like I said, I just don't really read a lot of mystery thrillers, so I don't have a lot on my radar. But if there is one that comes out that is super popular that I see a lot of people talking about, maybe I will check it out. But that's the list so far. Okay, and so let's get into my classics reading list. I just have a few, not too many. Classic novels are something that I really do want to try to read more this year. I just think that they're cool, and I think it's cool to see like what books were popular like a long time ago, and not only just to read what books were popular but like how they were written. Like I feel like it's just a really good insight into like the language, the culture, like of those time periods. And so I think that they're pretty cool and important to see like how they've influenced literature and books and reading today. The first book that I will say I want to read is Emma by Jane Austen. I have tried to read that book twice last year, and I would listen to it like an audiobook, and it's not that I thought the book was bad, but it's more just like every single time I thought the book was over, it wasn't. And then I kept thinking like, "Oh, I'm nearing the end." And it was like, "Oh no, you have a whole other part to read." And then that was kind of just like a little bit tiring. Like I think I felt a little bit fatigued, but I think now that I know this book is long as hell, I can read it. And the thing for me with classics, I will say all of these will probably be audiobooks for me. I realized it's hard for me to physically like read them just because I feel like the language is so different, and the way like their grammar and everything was the way they spoke was so different back then, that it's a lot easier for me to understand classics if I'm listening to them as opposed to me reading them on my own. And so the next classics that I want to read are Things Fall Apart and No Longer at Ease by Chinua Achebe, or Achebe, I think. I read Things Fall Apart in high school, and to be honest, when I read it, I was like, this book is bad, and I hate the main character. He's gross. And I think the main character is gross, but I also think there was more I was supposed to get out of that book than that. And so now that I'm older, I'm like, I want to reread Things Fall Apart. And then I also want to read No Longer at Ease, just try a new book by that author. Um, and then I want to read East of Eden and The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. The Grapes of Wrath is something I tried to read in high school, and I just thought it was so boring. I don't think I made it past like page 10, but now that I know to like audiobook my classics, I just those are two John Steinbeck books that I really do want to get to. And then I want to read Sula and Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. I read Beloved a couple of years ago. That book I did not audiobook. I read it and annotated it, and not even for school. I read that for fun. Like I put myself to work reading that book for fun. But even though that book was hard to understand, it definitely gave me an appreciation for Toni Morrison. I know she's an iconic author, such an important author who has like shaped reading and literature and books, and so I just want to read more of her books. Like it's simple as that. And then the last book that I have is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. This is another book that I wanted to read for a long time. um and so and plus, there's been so many like adaptations of that book that I'm like, I want to watch the adaptations, but I gotta read the book first. And I know it's such an iconic book that I'm like, I have to read it. But those are my classics. Not too bad. Maybe there are a couple more that I'll get to because I think I do want to try to read 10 this year. I think I listed like 7. But those are the ones that I have so far. We'll see if anything else comes up. Okay, and so the last category that I'm going to talk about is my nonfiction reading list. This book list is actually pretty hefty. Um, I do not think I will get to all of these books this year. I highly doubt it. But again, this is more just like TBR, what is on my radar. I realized like last year that I love history. And not only do I want to read more historical fiction, but I just want to learn more about history in general. And so I kind of curated this nonfiction reading list with that in mind. And another thing that I realized, sorry, I'm all over the place, but I also love reading memoirs, and not just reading them, but like listening to them, just like hearing someone tell their own story. I found so like amazing and interesting this past year. So I feel like those are kind of my vibe with nonfiction. I feel like for me, nonfiction is something that I do try to read, even if it's just a little bit, because I am a social worker and I want to be just more knowledgeable about what is going on, what are the issues, what's the historical background like behind the issues. Like I just want to be more aware and informed because I think that'll help me like just be a better social worker, be better in my career and my practice just by having more knowledge as to why some of the people that I may be helping or working with are even going through some of their struggles in the first place. So that's just like unnecessary context, but for me, that's kind of why some of these books are so like history dense or just talks about different um, social issues. That's just why that's kind of what has driven me to be interested in that. But the first book that I have is The 100 Years' War on Palestine, A History of Settler Colonialism and Resistance. And then I also have The 10 Myths About Israel by Ilan Pappé. I feel like it's no secret, just like all the protests and um, about everything that's going on like in Israel and Palestine, and the United States involvement has been everywhere this past year, as it should be. But I feel like I am someone who doesn't really even know the history behind this conflict. And definitely, like, I was in New York, attending school in New York at the time. I was attending NYU and I was doing my internship with students from Columbia, and just like seeing all of the protests and everything that was going on, it just like made me realize I'm like, I have no idea what any of this is about and I want to learn. And so, again, it's just more just like wanting to be more aware and informed about what's going on in the world. And then I have A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. I also, a couple of other like more history books that I want to read are 1491, Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus by Charles C. Mann, and Indigenous Peoples History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Um, Again, like obviously America and this land that I live on did not begin with Columbus. So I want to kind of know what was it like before Columbus. People were obviously living here, indigenous people were obviously living here before they were forced out, and so or forced away from their home and massacred. And so I'm like, I just want to learn. I want to know the history of the United States, of this country, of this world. Like I just want to know. um and then I also have How the World Is Past, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America by Clint Smith, South to America, A Journey Below the Dixon to Understand the Soul of a Nation by Imani Perry, The Warmth of Other Suns, The Epic Story of America's Great Migration by Isabel Wilkerson, The Color of Law, Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America by Richard Rothstein. Those are just all history books. And also, I'm like preventing so many interruptions in my just listing out these books, but I realize I don't want to just learn about history in general, but I realize there are so many events that have happened that I want to get an in-depth analysis of each event. And I'll talk about like the books that I want to read that'll kind of are more like specific. But I realize like there are things like the Tulsa Race Massacre. I even think of something like the Boston Tea Party, the Revolutionary War. Like, I feel like in school, the history that we learn and receive is so broad, and it's like I want to get specific and learn about specific events that have impacted culture, that have impacted history. And so that's why, I feel like some of these books are pretty specific, but that's just kind of where my interest is now. I want to read All About Love by Bell Hooks. I've just been interested. I've heard that book is really, really good. It has a lot of good insight. Um, I don't know. I feel like it's a classic. I feel like so many people like talk about it and rave about it, so I want to read it. Um, and then there's groundbreaking The Tulsa Race Massacre and an American City Search for Justice by Scott Ellsworth. So that's more of a like event specific book. And then Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I've just heard a lot about this book as well. I heard it's really popular. And then I want to read The Genealogical Adam and Eve by S. Joshua Swamidas. I have it on my TBR card already. This book I've known about for years because it's by S. Joshua Swamidas. He's a geneticist, but he's also a Christian, and his whole theory is that universal ancestry, like with like Adam and Eve, is scientific, but it also doesn't have to like go against evolution. Like both of those things can be true at the same time. And as I've just like grown in my faith journey and just kind of like challenged, certain beliefs, like I was taught there's only Adam and Eve, there's no evolution. But now it's like I feel like I feel like and understand that there can be room for both views to exist, and they don't have to contradict each other, especially if there's evidence for both. Then it can't be ignored. And so I really want to read this book. I flipped through it already. It definitely looks a little textbooky, and I feel a little bit intimidated. Like I'm still gonna read it, but I'm also just like, oh my god. Like there's a reason why I did not pursue science for a reason, because looking at all the graphs and the charts, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a lot. But yeah. I do want to read it though and kind of see like what he has to say and like see the evidence, so that even as I shape my belief, it's like, okay, no, I have evidence, like back it up. So I think that's pretty cool. And then I want to read The Plantagenets, The Warrior Kings and Queens Who Made England by Dan Jones. I think that's just a book that I put on there to just, it's more world history. Um, and then there's Born in Blackness, Africa, Africans, and the Making of the Modern World, 1471 to the Second World War by Howard W. French. The Overlooked Americans, The Resilience of Our Rural Towns and What It Means for Our Country by Elizabeth Currid Halkett. That book I actually really do want to read this year, especially because like having a boyfriend that's from a rural town and then looking at this previous election and the results and like seeing why the results were they were, I really do believe it's because a lot of those rural towns are overlooked and not taken seriously and not prioritized. And I feel like there's a big or at least by the Democratic Party, I should say. um and I feel like there's a big community there that has a very important impact on America. And it's like, why are they so overlooked? And maybe if they weren't, maybe things would be a little bit different. Maybe results would be different. Maybe America would look a little bit differently. And so I do kind of want to get a perspective on that. Um, and then I want to read the First World War, A Complete History, and the Second World War, A Complete History by Martin Gilbert. Again, I know those two wars have such massive impacts on America, and I feel like I only know the surface. And I'm like, I want to get in deep and know about the First World War and the Second World War. I mean, literally changed history forever, changed the course of how we all live our lives forever. And I'm like, I feel like that's just something that I just want to know, and I'm so interested to know more about. And then I want to read Black on Both Sides, A Racial History of Trans Identity by C. Riley Norton, The Stonewall Reader by the New York Public Library. Those are just more books on like LGBTQ history, but that's something that I'm not super like knowledgeable about, so I just want to learn more. And then I have a couple of like Christian books, like Believing is Seeing by Michael Gwynn and Holier Than Thou by Jackie Hill Perry. I mean, I don't know Michael Gwynn, but I know Jackie Hill Perry. I've known about her for a long time, and I think I may not agree with all of her views, but I do think overall she is very wise and has a lot of wisdom to offer on just like what a relationship with God should look like and how to trust God. So I do want to read her book. And then there's Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. The War Before the War, The Fugitive Slaves, and the Struggle for America's Soul from the Revolution to the Civil War. And then I think it's part of the Oxford History of the United States, so I kind of want to just read all the books in the Oxford History of the United States. And that's why I say I probably will never get to all these books this year, because there are a lot, but I just have them on there just to have on my radar, just to read at least one. And then there's also Deep South, a social anthropological study of caste and class by Allison Davis, Burleigh B. Gardner, and Mary R. Gardner. There's also Case, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. I know that one is pretty popular, and I'm familiar with her, or maybe not with her work. I think she wrote The New Jim Crow, which I did read, and I didn't, love. I did enjoy that book. It taught me so much. So I just want to read more of her books. And then there's The Making of African America, The Four Great Migrations by Ira Berlin, The Killing of the Black Body, Race Reproduction, and the Meaning of Liberty by Dorothy Roberts. As a Black American, like, I just want to learn more about Black history. I feel like all the history that I've received, all the Black history that I've received in school was barely any, and if there was, it was all consolidated into Black History Month. And I know that there is so much history, and I feel like I've started to already look into that, and I just have such a desire to learn more about Black history and how Black people have shaped America, but also just like all of the injustices we've been through. Because, and again, I feel like this past like year has just shown me that education is so important, and that knowing my history is the only thing that really brings about true freedom. Because it's like no one can tell me anything if I know where like we have been and how far we've come and how far we still have to come. And it's like I feel like once you know history, once you are educated in that way, it's like it's true freedom. Because then it's like, no, you know, so no one can lie to you or try to make you believe something that isn't true um, about our history. Because it's like, no, you know for yourself. And so that's really important to me, and that's something I want to prioritize this year. And then just to get into a couple of just other nonfiction books and like memoirs are Beautiful Boy by David Sheff and Tweak by Nick Sheff. I think these are stories about addiction that, it's something that is happening in like my family. And um it's just something that I've always been interested in. I feel like I don't work with substance misuse now, but I feel like that's a path in my career that I would like to take. And so I kind of just want to learn and get more perspective on what that really is like. And then I want to read, oh, and I already read this. I have Down the Drain by Julia Fox. That's her memoir. Already read it. Amazing. I think she's such an icon. And I'll talk about it when I wrap up my books in January, at the end of the month. But she's an icon. I love it. And then I want to read My Body by Emily Ratajkowski. I've heard a lot of people talk about this book. I know it's super popular. I've wanted to read it for a really long time. And then Finding Me by Viola Davis. I have heard so much about this book, and I just want to read it. I think it's a memoir, or maybe it's just like general nonfiction. I don't know, but yeah, I'm getting a little delirious now. I've been talking for a long time, but um, I just want to read that book. I've known about it for a while. And then I want to read The Master of Me by Kiki Palmer. I'm obsessed with Kiki Palmer. I love her. I think she's so funny. I've been following her for a long time, and I'm just so happy like for her and for her success. And so I just want to read her memoir. And then I want to read A Well-Trained Wife by Tia Levings. I think this is a story, a memoir about a woman who grew up in like super conservative evangelical Christianity, and like how like her entire life like she was taught that her only purpose is to be a wife who just obeys everything her husband or the men around her tell her. And so I think it's a story for her getting out of that. And so um I always find stories like that super interesting, and so I'm excited to read that. And then I think that's it. I think those are everything on my nonfiction reading list. It's again a very hefty list. I honestly think there's probably oh no, my fiction list has just like one book more. But yeah, it's a long list. I don't think I'll get to everything, but I just have a desire to just like learn more. And so there's just so many nonfiction books on my radar that I'm like, I just want to read. And I feel like I've become such a history nerd that I'm like, I just want to know everything about everything. Um, and so that's that. I feel like there are two other books that I have on my radar that maybe I should have put in the classics section, but I just didn't. I don't know why they're in the nonfiction, or maybe they are. I don't know. But I want to read some James Baldwin this year too. I know he's like an iconic author, iconic like member of the like civil rights movement, and I want to read The Fire Next Time and Go Tell It on the Mountain by him. Again, I don't really know like what to categorize them, like whether it's nonfiction or classics or whatever, but I do want to read them. But yes. Oh, wait. No. I lied. There's one more. Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King. I do want to read that this year as well. That's a horror book. If I get to it, that will probably be the only horror book that I read this year, unless I love it. Then I guess I found a new genre. But that's the only horror book I have on my radar because I think that's all I can handle. But yeah, so those are all the books on my 2025 TBR. I'm so excited. I've already started reading, and I love to read, and I'm just so excited to get to a lot of these books. I'm so excited for just the year of reading I have ahead of me. I love reading. I love it so much. And so I'm excited. Thank you to anyone who is watching this video. I appreciate it so much. I'm excited to keep making um videos and videos like this on my channel. And so I hope everyone is having an amazing day, and take care. Bye.